I was originally going to make a video on Frida Kahlo as part of my Writing People Different From Me series, but then Ask a Mortician put out a video on Vladimir Lenin's grave, and honestly, if I could make this whole channel a fan channel about Caitlin Doty's channel, I would. So let's talk about Vladimir Lenin. Hey! I interrupt this video to tell you about my book, Phantoms of the Inferno, a high fantasy story with elemental magic systems, evil kings, espionage, and mass extinction events galore. If that sounds interesting, you should read Phantoms of the Inferno on Scribblehub and Wattpad. I put up a new chapter every Sunday and have the links down in the descriptions. Now, back to the video. So when I was watching Ask a Mortician's video, which you should watch all her videos, especially the one about the Uruguayan rugby team, I was struck because I hate Lenin, but I don't know why. I mean, I know why, because communism and Red Scare and American pride and all that. But the thing is, I also feel that way about Stalin, but I also hate him for killing millions of people. So I had to ask myself the question of why I hate Lenin, why I hate communism, and if I should at all. And I fell down a whole rabbit hole.
He went down a rabbit hole.
Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov was born April 22, 1870. He was the third of 6 children born into a well-educated, upper-middle-class family. His father was a school teacher, and his mother was the daughter of a physician. And by all accounts, Lenin had a happy childhood. He was a smart, athletic kid growing up in a happy, tight-knit family. But even in his happy childhood, the bells of revolution could be heard, since Lenin and his 4 siblings who lived into adulthood would all end up joining the Revolutionary Party. This included his older brother, Alexander, who died in 1887, just a year after their father died, when he was executed for conspiring with revolutionaries to assassinate Emperor Alexander III. And thanks to the death of his father and older brother, Lenin saw himself become the man of the family at just 17. But he wouldn't let these tragedies keep him down long. He ended up graduating first in his class and enrolled in Kazan University in 1887.
College?
But Lenin was kicked out of university fairly quickly for organizing unpermitted student assemblies. For this, he was exiled to his grandfather's estate, where his sister Anna was also spending time in exile. Lenin spent 2 years there before he was permitted to return to Kazan, but he still wasn't allowed to return to school. Instead, he spent his free time delving deeper into revolutionary ideologies and discovering the works of Karl Marx and becoming a Marxist. Then later that year, Lenin was permitted to take his law exams, which he excelled at, and in 1891 he was allowed to take the bar and became a lawyer who primarily served peasants and artisans. And I imagine if he wasn't radicalized before, this year really did it, because this was also the beginning of the 1891-1892 famine that would go on to kill almost 400,000 people. And in all the ways this famine was natural, caused by drought and poor harvest, it was also caused, as almost all modern famines are, by poor leadership. There was theoretically enough food for everyone, but poor communication led to improper food distribution.
Hey, I'm hungry. You hungry?
Anyway, it was also about this time that Lenin began working with the Union for the Struggles for the Working Class. It was in this organization where he met his wife, Nadezhda Kuznetsova, and he also traveled during this time across Western Europe to talk to exiled Union members. That is, until he himself was arrested and exiled in 1885. He was sentenced to spend 15 months in prison, then he and his wife were exiled to Siberia. But Lenin didn't let this keep him down either, because he spent his time in Siberia traveling to other countries, as well as distributing leaflets and other information about the Union and their ideals on a communist utopia they believed Russia could become. And it was also during this time that he adopted the name of Lenin.
Fine, you want to be a communist? Be a communist.
Then shortly after he returned from exile, the Union faced its own unrest, with members not sure how to handle allowing new members to join or the conflicting ideals of already existing members, which led to its breaking point into the Menshevik and Bolshevik parties. And if Bolshevik sounds familiar, that's because those are the people who led the revolution against Tsar Nicholas II and ended up killing him and his family. And I've done a lot of research on Princess Anastasia because I like history and I really like the musical, and she died with her family. That's almost a certainty at this point. She died, and then she and her little brother's bodies were separated from the rest of their families, and all of them were buried in shallow graves. And I could go on about that, about the Bolsheviks' revolution and the Romanovs' deaths, but I think I'm going to save that for a video on ideas how to kill off characters that will make your readers go, Jesus! I will say, very tempting to hate him for killing the Romanov kids, But the thing is, I don't blindly hate any French people for what they did to Prince Louis, so I'm still looking.
I've been doing some research.
Alright, I've gotten ahead of myself. The Romanovs weren't killed until after World War I, which Lenin actually didn't spend in Russia. He was against the war, so he and several other anti-war Bolsheviks, including his wife, fled to Switzerland since it was neutral. During their time in Switzerland, Lenin and his fellow Bolsheviks weren't able to get much information out of Russia until they managed to return after the end of the war, and that's where things really took off. Russia was in rough shape after the war, and it didn't take long for the Bolsheviks to seize power from Tsar Nicholas, forcing him to abdicate the throne in 1917 and executing him in 1918. And after that, Lenin set his sights into reshaping Russia into a Soviet government, that being a government ruled by workers, soldiers, and peasants, and he turned the economy into that of a communist one, quicker than anyone really thought possible. But things also weren't smooth sailing. Lenin was facing unrest within the Bolshevik party, disagreeing with a lot of viewpoints of Stalin, and facing larger issues like famine again.
Hey, I'm hungry. You hungry?
And that's what's got me, the 1921-1922 famine, which was exacerbated by Lenin in an attempt to help stir civil unrest. Guys, don't cause famines! But luckily, Lenin wasn't able to truly unrest the public because in 1922, his health began failing. It was that year when he faced a hard operation to remove a bullet from an assassination attempt years prior, and he had scarcely recovered from the surgery before he had his first stroke. This was followed by a series of strokes that would ultimately end his life on January 21st, 1924. But between his strokes, he did try to set up a successor for his work. It's widely believed he wanted his successor to be Leon Trotsky. Lenin saw many possible candidates, like Stalin, but as I mentioned above, they had a lot of conflicting ideas, and Lenin didn't think Stalin had the personality to properly lead the Communist Party. And, I mean, he was right. It says something that the Russian people still put time and effort into maintaining Lenin's body, while Stalin's been worm food for a long time.
The body's gone! Huh?
So how can you tie Lenin into your writing? Well, there's a lot to work with here. You can get a good idea on how to form a villain by looking at the actions Lenin took, all in the name of helping the people. Or you can learn about how history and where a person is from will affect them to get a better handle on your own characters. Lenin may have come from a good family, but his grandfather was a serf, and Russia has a long, brutal history of famine that I'm sure helped Lenin when he was trying to use the 1921 famine to his advantage. Or you could talk about revolution and what it really looks like, because the death of Tsar Nicholas may be dramatic and a great climax to a book, but it was decades in the making, and it was built up by Lenin spending decades spreading awareness, information, and traveling to gather allies and his own information.
I've been doing some research.
But the thing I really want to talk about is government, because it was communism, the Red Scare of it all, that really hooked me in here. Alright, bear with me, because I will bring it all together. So the way The Legend of Korra handled government really annoyed me. I liked the idea of the United Republic, and I thought the council was interesting, but then in season 2, they disbanded the council in favor of a president? Really? And then the series ends with Prince Wu saying he won't continue to rule as king of the Earth Kingdom, and will instead let it turn into several independent democratic nations. And I'm not completely caught up on the comics, but I've read enough to know it's democracy like we have here. A two-party system where a president, much like here and in the United Republic, acts as a very powerful figurehead. And I hated that. That was the worst sin any writer can make. It was boring. Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing my own government. I have much more topical points I'd go over if I were doing that. I'm criticizing living in this world, knowing this form of government, spending so long in school learning about our government. I don't want to escape into fantasy only to see a mirror of American democracy. There are so many other forms of government worth exploring. Why couldn't a fantasy world be the communist utopia Lenin wanted? How would a communist utopia look different in a world with different fantasy races? How do you do away with class systems in a world where some people can do magic and others can't? How does a revolution change when you're trying to get creatures like elves involved when they've lived long enough to see several revolutions come and go? I'm going to make a writing video on different governments. This is going to be its own series. My point is, don't be afraid to explore different forms of government in your fantasy world. Just because one form doesn't work well for humans doesn't mean it wouldn't work for orcs or dragons. Plus, it's a great way to get your audience invested. I'm sure I've made people angry by just saying communist utopia, and while you shouldn't rage bait, you should aim to invoke all kinds of strong emotions in your audience and get their attention and investments with strange ideas that will hook them in like Lenin and my blind hatred for him hooked me into making this video. And that's all I got. Tell me about your fantasy governments down in the comments, and don't forget to read and write! Hey, because I always forget to say it, I made a list and an end card. Remember to like, subscribe, ring that bell, buy milk, cereal, bread. I shouldn't have reused a grocery list for this list. Well, do at least 3 of those things, and thanks for watching!